The morning air on the Morgan Ranch was just as I liked it, the old porch swing creaking a familiar rhythm beneath me while I savored the warmth of my coffee. 60 years of Texas sunrises had settled over this land, each one a quiet repetition of the one before, marking my time here. Then the peace shattered. A piercing whine of an engine tore through the stillness, sharp and aggressive, followed by the telltale rattle of loose stones scattering from a vehicle accelerating at speed. Down the long drive, a plume of dust billowed upwards like a sudden detonation. Bursting through the haze was a gleaming white BMW, its gold wheels blindingly bright, hurtling towards my home with an unnerving recklessness. Before I could even set my mug down, before my protesting knees could push me from my wicker chair, the car screeched to a halt, no more than 30 yards from my porch, kicking up a fresh wave of dirt. The driver's door flung open, and a woman emerged. She moved with an unnerving proprietorship, as if the very ground she walked on belonged to her, a bitter irony given her trespassing. Her attire, a tight crimson business suit, seemed jarringly out of place against the weathered fences and arid landscape. Her heels dug aggressively into the gravel. Her face was etched with impatience, her expression stern. In her hand, she brandished a sheaf of papers, raising them like a battle flag as she advanced directly towards me, utterly disregarding the prominent "no trespassing" signs my grandfather had erected a half-century prior. "You must vacate this property at once!" she bellowed, her voice a shrill blade, even before she reached the steps, sharp enough to set my teeth on edge. "I purchased this land outright. This ranch is mine now." I simply stared, the sheer, unvarnished audacity of it all striking me with the force of a physical blow. Mine. This wasn't merely a tract of land on a map. My name is Arthur Morgan. Art to my friends, a retired sergeant major. 22 years I dedicated to the army, witnessing enough of the world's harsh realities to appreciate the profound peace I found here, on the very land my great-grandfather wrested from the wilderness over 120 years ago. This soil pulsed with Morgan lineage. My great-grandfather, with his own hands, constructed this very dwelling. The legitimate deed, solid and irrefutable, lay secured within the formidable iron safe inside, less than 50 feet from where I stood. This ranch is more than just property registered at the county courthouse. It's a living chronicle bound by barbed wire and aged timber. Every fence post whispers a tale. Every blemish on the barn door holds an echo. And Sarah, my Sarah, adored this vista from the porch more than anything. She would sit right here, her hand a comforting warmth upon mine, as we watched the sky ignite with streaks of gold and violet. Her roses, those tenacious crimson climbers she lovingly planted by the old barn, still valiantly pushed their way skyward each spring, as vibrant and enduring as her memory. To lose this place would be more than just forfeiting acreage and a structure. It would mean severing the final tether, the last vestige connecting me to her, extinguishing the echo of her laughter on the breeze. Her eyes, sharp and appraising, swept over the porch, the house, and the vast expanse beyond with an undisguised disdain. I could almost visualize the calculations behind her gaze. An aging homestead, a recalcitrant elder, likely financially strained, an easy mark for whatever sterile corporate agenda they planned for the development across the highway. The hushed conversations I'd overheard in town lately, murmurs of progress and developers acquiring land, suddenly crystallized into a chilling reality. Those unfamiliar vehicles I'd noticed slowing near my access road, they weren't merely lost tourists. An old soldier's intuition, a primal sense of impending trouble that I'd too long suppressed, now blared a desperate alarm in my gut. I rose slowly, deliberately, unfolding my full 6 feet and 2 inches. Allowing the ingrained discipline of my army years to reassert itself in my posture, I ensured I loomed over her. I summoned that ingrained calm, the one that had preserved lives in combat zones she could scarcely comprehend. "Ma'am," I stated, my voice low, steady, and carrying clearly through the morning air. "You are trespassing. I strongly advise you to turn around, re-enter your expensive vehicle, and depart my property before this situation becomes unpleasant. My hand, hanging loosely at my side, instinctively coiled into a fist. This wasn't merely about legal documents or some faceless corporation. This was about Sarah's roses, just beginning to bud near the railing, about the sunset view she held dear, about the legacy entrusted to me. The thought of this sharp-featured woman, her presence reeking of cloying perfume and naked avarice, trampling with her high heels over Sarah's memory, ignited a cold, hard fury deep within me. She wasn't just trespassing on my land. She was intruding upon my very existence. My words hung suspended in the now still morning air. Elena Vance's meticulously sculpted features tightened, her eyes, previously icy, revealing a fleeting spark of surprise before being swiftly eclipsed by contempt. She actually chuckled, a brief grating sound utterly devoid of mirth. "Unpleasant," she repeated, flicking her blonde hair over her shoulder. "Oh, please. You're simply an old man clinging to property that no longer belongs to you. I have a buyer secured, a highly motivated one. You will either sign the relocation papers I have right here," she jabbed a manicured finger towards the stack she held, "or I will have you forcibly removed. Consider this your sole generous offer." The sheer dismissive arrogance of it all rendered me momentarily speechless. Before I could formulate a retort sharper than the curses simmering in my mind, she spun on her heel, her footwear digging defiantly into the gravel, and marched back to her ostentatious automobile. The engine roared to life, and she sped away, leaving in her wake another cloud of dust and the faint, lingering scent of her perfume hanging offensively in the air. She did not remain absent for long. Approximately 3 days elapsed, just sufficient time for the settled dust to reveal a fragile return of tranquility. I dedicated those days to mending a section of fence near the creek, attempting to quiet the gnawing anxiety in my stomach. Then one afternoon, the white BMW reappeared, its tires crunching up the drive with the same sense of entitlement. This time, she was not alone. 2 men in dark, ill-fitting suits disembarked with her, their demeanor suggesting hired muscle striving too hard to project professionalism. They dispensed with any pleasantries. "You were duly warned, Mr. Morgan," Vance declared, a smug smile plastered across her face. She remained near her vehicle this time, allowing the 2 men to advance towards the porch. "These gentlemen are here to finalize the necessary documentation. We strongly advise your cooperation." One of the men, broad-necked with eyes set too close together, produced a mobile phone and directed it squarely at me. "Subject is exhibiting hostile behavior and refusal to cooperate," he announced loudly, dictating for the recording, "and is disregarding lawful directives." "Lawful?" I countered, crossing my arms and planting my feet firmly on the top step. A cold, sharp anger pierced through my anxiety. They were attempting to provoke a reaction, to manufacture a pretext. Not today. "You are trespassing," I stated, my voice level, carrying the parade ground authority I hadn't employed in years. "This is private property. Turn around and leave this instant," the man continued to film. "Subject is issuing verbal threats." "Threats?" I almost scoffed. "That's a warning, son. There's a distinction, and since you're recording..." I reached into my back pocket, retrieving my well-worn smartphone, and activated the recording function. The 2 men faltered, momentarily thrown off their rehearsed script. Vance's smug expression wavered for an instant. "This is Arthur Morgan," I stated clearly into my phone, slowly panning to capture their faces. "The BMW, its license plate visible, on my private property, the Morgan Ranch. The date and time are being recorded. These individuals, Elena Vance and 2 unidentified males, are trespassing after being previously instructed to leave. Any actions they undertake, any threats they issue, will be documented and submitted to Sheriff Brody's office." The thick-necked man lowered his phone slightly. He cast a glance back at Vance, who hissed something under her breath. The other man, leaner and appearing distinctly uneasy, whispered urgently to her. She glared at me, temporarily defeated but radiating pure malice. "You will regret this, old man," she spat. "I doubt that," I replied calmly. as much as I doubt the legality of whatever documents you're brandishing." They turned, shuffling awkwardly back to the car. But as Vance entered, she deliberately kicked over one of Sarah's rose bushes near the porch railing, scattering soil and broken stems across the wooden planks, a final, petty act of vandalism that felt deeply personal. I watched them depart, the dust settling once more, but the sense of peace felt irrevocably fractured. This had escalated beyond a mere business dispute. It was rapidly transforming into a personal vendetta. That night, sleep eluded me. Every creak of the old house sounded like an intruder. Every shadow seemed to stir. I found myself habitually checking the locks on doors and windows, a precaution I hadn't felt compelled to take in years. I went to the gun safe, retrieved my old service pistol, a Colt M1911, its familiar weight reassuring in my hand. I field-stripped it, cleaned and oiled each component with methodical precision. The familiar ritual provided a measure of calm. It wasn't the desire for conflict, but a readiness for it, should it insist on finding me. The potential cost began to weigh heavily, not just emotionally, but financially. If this continued, legal expenses would mount. Michael Sterling, my attorney and an old Army comrade, wasn't inexpensive, even with the discounted rate he offered friends and veterans. Repairs to the ranch, should they escalate beyond minor vandalism? How long could I sustain such a siege? The ranch barely operated at a profit most years. My savings were not inexhaustible. The weight of 120 years of family history suddenly pressed down on me. Could I be the Morgan who lost it all? My answer arrived less than a week later. I was in the barn, attempting to revive the ancient water pump, when I heard the low rumble. Not a single vehicle this time, but several. Wiping grease from my hands onto my jeans, I stepped out into the harsh afternoon sun, and my heart sank. There she was again, Ellen Vance, exiting her BMW as if arriving at a grand social event. But behind her, churning up a cloud of dust, were 2 pickup trucks and a dilapidated van. At least a dozen individuals spilled out, some in suits similar to before, others in construction vests carrying clipboards. A couple even bore surveying equipment. They fanned out silently, heading towards the barn, the cattle pens, the fence line, like a swarm of locusts descending upon a field. Vance marched towards me, a triumphant, predatory gleam in her eyes. "Good afternoon, Mr. Morgan," she said, her voice dripping with feigned sweetness. "We are here to commence the preliminary inspection." I actually laughed then, a low, deep chuckle that originated in my chest and rumbled outwards. "Inspection? Inspection of what?" "Of my property, of course," she replied brightly, gesturing towards the unfolding activity. "As stipulated in the purchase agreement you signed, we are authorized to inspect the premises prior to finalizing the closing." Purchase agreement. I what? The words sounded utterly preposterous. "I haven't signed anything. You are trespassing." I shouted it louder this time, ensuring every one of her hired hands could hear. "All of you, get off my land, now." Most ignored me, clearly following Vance's directive. A few clipboard-wielding individuals hesitated, their gazes shifting nervously between me and their employer. One man began unspooling a measuring tape along the fence line. They were acting as if they already owned the place, taking inventory, and I knew instinctively that if I laid a hand on any of them, the sheriff would be here, charging me with assault faster than I could blink. It was a calculated provocation. I retrieved my phone again, my finger hovering over Sheriff Brody's number. "If you take one more step, Vance," I warned, "I'm calling the law." She merely smirked and extracted a single sheet of paper from a portfolio. She waved it dramatically before my face. "No need. It's all perfectly legal." "Your signature," she said smugly, tapping a spot at the bottom of the page. "Right here." I snatched the paper. It was a photocopy, and a poor one at that. But there at the bottom was a scrawled signature that bore a passing, superficial resemblance to my own. Sloppy, an incorrect slant, but close enough to be deliberately misleading. My blood ran cold. This wasn't mere harassment anymore. It was outright fraud. That is not my signature, I stated firmly, my voice tight with anger. Vance's smirk widened. Really? It appears to be mine. It appeared to be mine at the county clerk's office where it was filed this morning. Tell it to the judge. She turned away dismissively. All right, team. Let's get measurements on that barn. Filed this morning. It was a deliberate setup, a scheme designed to overwhelm and confuse. Just as I was dialing Brody's number, shouting erupted from the vicinity of the cattle pens. Ethan, the neighbor's son, whom I employed part-time, a good lad, barely 18, was arguing with one of the men in suits who had ventured too close to the herd. The man shoved Ethan hard. The boy stumbled back against the old wooden fence. Crack! A rotten section of the fence gave way, and the cattle, already agitated by the strangers, the shouting, the unfamiliar vehicles, seized their opportunity. They surged through the gap, a tidal wave of terrified beef. Hooves thundered, eyes wide with panic, heading directly towards Vance's scattered entourage. People shrieked, scattering like quail. Clipboards and hard hats flew through the air. Surveying equipment was abandoned. Vance shrieked and dove behind her precious BMW as Zeus, my large temperamental prize bull, lowered his head and charged across the yard, snorting and bucking like a rodeo nightmare. I sprinted towards the barn, whistling sharply, attempting the calls that the herd knew, desperately trying to regain control. But it was too late. Utter chaos erupted across the ranch yard, and directly in the midst of it all, Vance's gleaming white BMW sat parked squarely in the path of my most aggressive bull. Zeus, spotting the large white obstruction, did not hesitate. He lowered his massive horned head and impacted the driver's side door with the force of a battering ram. Crunch! The metal crumpled like thin foil. The side mirror snapped off. The front wheel buckled sideways with a sickening groan. The car alarm began to blare hysterically as the entire vehicle rocked violently on its suspension. Vance shrieked again, scrambling out from behind the wreckage, one of her expensive heels snapping as she stumbled through the dirt and cow manure towards one of the pickup trucks. Her crew fared no better. Some had blindly sprinted into the open fields. One of the suits, in a moment of sheer terror, actually dove headfirst into a horse trough, sending water splashing everywhere. It would have been comical had it not been so dangerously infuriating. I continued whistling, low and sharp, using the calming calls that Sarah used to employ. Slowly, gradually, Zeus and the others began to settle. They weren't malicious animals, merely frightened by the invasion. After a few tense minutes, I managed to herd most of them back through a side gate behind the barn. My heart pounded against my ribs like a drum. It had been 30 years since I'd seen active duty, but handling chaos under pressure, that's something the Army instills deep within your bones. I walked slowly back towards Vance and her bedraggled, manure-splattered crew huddled near their remaining vehicles. Her expensive perfume was completely overwhelmed by the scent of dust, fear, and cow dung. Utter failure radiated from them. "Still want that inspection?" I asked, my voice calm, but carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet yard. Vance opened her mouth, then closed it, her face flushed crimson beneath its layer of expensive makeup. Good. Just then, the welcome sound of sirens grew louder. 2 sheriff's cruisers finally bumped up the driveway, lights flashing. Sheriff Brody emerged from the lead car. A tall, wiry man I'd known since he was a rookie deputy. He took in the scene. The wrecked BMW, the broken fence, the scattered, disheveled city folk attempting to appear innocent. Me standing there, covered in dust. His eyebrows shot up nearly to his hairline. "Evening, Art," he said, offering a small, weary nod. He looked tired, his years etched deeply. Perhaps those rumors about pressure from county commissioners sympathetic to developers weren't mere gossip after all. "Evening, Brody," I replied, tipping my hat. "Got ourselves a bit of a trespassing situation here. Seems my bull took exception to their parking arrangement." Brody sighed, turning to Vance. "Ma'am, perhaps you can explain what you and your associates are doing on Mr. Morgan's property without his permission and apparently antagonizing his livestock." She recovered quickly, perhaps too quickly. "This man is squatting on my land, Sheriff," she snapped, waving the crumpled photocopy. "I purchased this ranch. I have the paperwork filed with the county." Brody glanced at me. I simply nodded towards the house. "Deeds are in the safe, Brody. Original copy. Been in my family since 1905. You know the history." He pinched the bridge of his nose, looking thoroughly exasperated. "Ma'am," he said, turning back to Vance, his voice acquiring a harder edge. "Unless you have a court order explicitly granting you possession or access, you are trespassing. Filing paperwork does not negate Mr. Morgan's existing deed until a judge rules otherwise. And from the looks of this," he gestured at the wrecked car and the broken fence, "you're also causing significant property damage. You and your people need to leave now." Her face flushed an even deeper red. "This is a misunderstanding," she stammered, shifting tactics. "A simple boundary survey. We will leave." "Oh, you'll be leaving," Brody stated grimly. "After my deputies take statements from everyone involved regarding the trespassing, destruction of property, and potential endangerment of livestock. You're fortunate nobody sustained serious injury out here today." One of the suits muttered something about legal representation. Brody cut him off. "Lawyers can sort that out later. Right now, you're all receiving citations for trespassing. And Ms. Vance," he nodded towards the mangled BMW, "the owner of that vehicle will likely want to speak with her insurance agent. We'll need a tow truck out here." It took over an hour for the deputies to gather statements, compose reports, and issue citations. Vance and her crew finally piled into their remaining vehicles and departed in disgrace, leaving the crippled BMW behind like a monument to their ignominious failure. Brody lingered for a moment, shaking his head as he watched them go. "These city developers," he muttered, more to himself than to me, "think they can just steamroll folks who've worked the land their entire lives." "Not this time, Brody," I said, managing a tired smile. He chuckled dryly. "Perhaps not. But Art, you need to be cautious. Get Michael Sterling on the line if you haven't already. This feels like it's going to escalate." "He's already on it," I assured him. "Thanks, Brody." He tipped his hat and departed, his cruiser kicking up one final cloud of dust. The ranch was quiet once more, but it was a tense, wounded silence. The following day, Ethan and I spent hours repairing the fence under the scorching Texas sun. The young man was subdued, clearly shaken by the previous day's events. "Sorry about that, Mr. Morgan," he finally said, handing me a post-hole digger. "That guy, he just came right at me. I didn't mean for the fence to break or the cattle to get out." I clapped him on the shoulder, sawdust clinging to my sweaty hand. "Wasn't your fault, son. Not one bit. They had no right being here pushing people around. You stood your ground." He looked visibly relieved. We worked until sunset. The physical exertion provided a welcome distraction, but the unease persisted. That evening, I installed a couple of inexpensive motion sensor floodlights near the barn and the house, feeling somewhat foolish, but deeming it necessary. The legal threat felt more potent now, more insidious than the physical confrontations. Filing forged documents that indicated planning, malice. The true extent of the animosity became clear 3 nights later. Around 2 in the morning, in the pitch blackness of a moonless night, a sound ripped me from sleep. It wasn't the usual groans of an old house settling, but a distinct metallic screeching emanating from the direction of the barn. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I retrieved the M1991 from my nightstand, confirmed it was loaded by touch, and disembarked from bed as silently as a phantom. Peering through the window blind, I saw nothing but the inky blackness surrounding the barn. Then the sound recurred, a clear, agonizing strain of metal under pressure. Someone was attempting to force the heavy lock on the barn door. This was the barn where I kept the tractor, the feed, and tools. It also housed several sealed containers filled with Sarah's old photographs, letters, items too painful to sort through, yet impossible to contemplate losing. A jolt of cold, sharp adrenaline coursed through me. Calling Brody now would be too time-consuming. They could vanish or inflict irreparable damage before he could reach me. No, this was my responsibility. I bypassed the front porch, exiting through the rear door, and utilized the familiar darkness, the cover of trees, and the old stone wall to approach the side of the barn. Now I could discern hushed, urgent voices. "Come on, hurry up! Get this damn thing open before the old man wakes up!" Too late for that, I thought. Taking a deep, steadying breath, I emerged from behind the water trough and flicked on my heavy-duty flashlight. Its powerful beam sliced through the night, illuminating 3 figures caught in the act at the barn door. A crowbar clanged loudly as one of them dropped it in startled surprise. "Freeze!" The command ripped from my throat, a pure echo of my drill sergeant days. They froze, like startled rabbits caught in a spotlight. One was tall and wiry, the other 2 appeared younger and more agitated. "Step away from the door," I ordered, my voice hard as rock. "Hands where I can see them." The tall one hesitated, his gaze flicking toward the fallen crowbar. A foolish, split-second decision. He lunged before his hands were even fully raised. The M1901 was already in my hand, aimed squarely at his chest. The flashlight beam held his eyes. I said, "Freeze!" I growled, the sound low and menacing in the night air. He stopped mid-lunge, terror washing over his features as the reality of his predicament struck him. His hand shot upwards. Okay, easy man." One of the younger ones began to slink away into the darkness, presumably towards their vehicle. "Bad idea," I snapped, instantly swinging the pistol and the beam of light towards him. "You move 1 more inch, friend, and you'll regret it for a very long time." He froze too, his hands visibly trembling. Good. Keeping them under control, I used my boot to nudge the crowbar further into the dirt. I slowly backed them towards the fence line bordering the road. "Sit down." They complied, huddling together, fear radiating from them. "Who sent you?" I demanded. The tall one licked his lips. "Well, we don't know what you're talking about. We were just looking for scrap metal." "Liar," I cut him off abruptly. Just then, his gaze flickered nervously past me, perhaps towards the house, and he muttered something under his breath, barely audible, but my hearing remained sharp. It sounded like, "Vance said he slept heavy." Confirmation. A cold certainty settled in my gut. Keeping the pistol steady with one hand, I pulled out my cell with the other and dialed Brody's direct number. "Brody," I said when he answered, his voice thick with sleep. "Art, Morgan, you're going to want to come back out to the ranch. Got 3 live ones for you this time. Caught them trying to crowbar my barn." A groan came from the other end. "You're kidding me, Art." "Wish I was," I replied grimly. A string of curses followed, then a promise that he was on his way. The wait felt interminable. Crickets chirped. An owl hooted mournfully down by the creek. The 3 men remained silent, their eyes darting nervously. These weren't common thieves. Vance was escalating, attempting intimidation, perhaps property destruction, hoping to break me. Over my dead body, I thought grimly. Finally, the welcome flash of blue and red lights swept down the driveway. Brody and another deputy emerged, weapons drawn, but held low. "Got them right here, Sheriff," I said, raising my free hand slightly. "Caught red-handed." Brody approached, handcuffs glinting. "Nice work, Art. Maybe you should come out of retirement." I managed a faint chuckle. "No thanks. Had my fill of trouble." They cuffed the 3 without incident. As the tall one was being guided into the cruiser, he turned and sneered at me. His fear had been replaced by impotent rage. "You won't win, old man. She always gets what she wants." The mask was off. No more pretense. After they left, the silence felt heavy. This wasn't just about the land anymore, it was war, and Vance had just proven she'd stop at nothing. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. I contacted Michael Sterling immediately. He began drafting cease and desist letters and exploring restraining orders. Meanwhile, I transformed the ranch into Fort Knox. High-lumen, motion-activated floodlights were installed on every corner. Wireless security cameras covered the driveway, the house, and the barn's ruins. As Brody's deputies confirmed, the intruders had doused the barn with gasoline before I apprehended them. The barn raid was clearly intended as an act of arson. Reinforced steel plates were added to the door jambs, along with new deadbolts. Ethan helped, his young face set with grim determination. The place began to resemble a besieged outpost more than a home. Just when I thought I had bolstered the physical defenses, the next assault arrived, silent and insidious, on paper. A county process server appeared one afternoon, handing me a thick stack of documents. Plural lawsuits filed by Ellen Vance and the shadowy development corporation she represented. Allegations of ranch neglect. Violations of obscure environmental codes I'd never heard of. Even animal cruelty. Lies. Everyone meticulously crafted to portray me as either incompetent or malicious. The next day I drove into town to meet Michael at a small diner off Main Street, a neutral location. He spread copies of the filings across the worn diner tabletop, his expression grim. It's worse than I thought, Art. This isn't just harassment. It's a coordinated assault. They're trying to bury you in legal fees, trigger county inspections, maybe even get liens placed on the property based on these bogus claims. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. My stomach churned as I flipped through the pages, the dense legal jargon mixing with blatant falsehoods. So, what do we do, Michael? He leaned forward, his eyes sharp. We fight, the same way you fought every battle your whole life. Strategically, relentlessly. We document everything, answer every false claim with facts. We file countersuits, fraud for the forged signature, harassment, conspiracy, attempted arson based on the intruder's admission, trespassing, damages. We hit back hard. But Art, he added, his voice softening slightly, it's going to cost a lot, and it's going to get nastier before it gets better. Are you prepared for that? I met his gaze, the reflection of the diner's fluorescent light stark in his pupils. I am. But driving back to the ranch, the weight of his words pressed down on me. Nasty. I hadn't grasped the full extent of it yet. As I turned down the dirt road leading home, a cold dread washed over me. Ethan's old pickup truck was parked haphazardly by the gate, the driver's side door hanging wide open, empty. "Ethan!" I yelled, slamming on my truck's brakes and jumping out, my heart suddenly pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Ethan!" No answer, only the wind whistling through the fence wires. I ran towards the house, my boots kicking up dust. That old soldier's instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong. The front door was ajar, splintered near the lock. Inside, chaos. Furniture overturned, chairs broken, papers scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. Someone had been here violently and recently. Pistol drawn, clearing rooms methodically as I hadn't had to do in decades, I moved through the violated space. It was empty, but the destruction was targeted, malicious. Then I reached the small study where I kept my accounts and Sarah's old desk, and I saw it, crudely taped to the wall, scrawled in thick black marker that dripped like blood. Sell or else. My breath hitched. The message was clear, brutal. But where was Ethan? I spun, ran back outside, shouting his name, my voice rising in panic. "Ethan, answer me! Damn it!" Finally, a faint groan reached me, seeming to come from the woods behind the blackened, skeletal ruins of the barn. I sprinted towards the sound, crashing through dry brush and brambles, ignoring the branches whipping at my face. And then I saw him, tied crudely to an oak tree with what looked like baling twine, slumped against the rough bark. His face was bruised, lips split, one eye swelling shut, his breathing shallow. "Ethan!" I fell to my knees beside him, fumbling with the knots, my hands trembling with a mixture of relief and white-hot fury. "You okay, son? Talk to me." He coughed, wincing. "Mr. Morgan." His voice was weak, raspy. Two guys jumped me when I came back from checking the south pasture. Said to give you the message." His head lolled against the tree. It looked like a concussion, maybe a broken wrist from where the twine bit deep. "I got the message, son," I said grimly, finally getting the ropes off. I helped him up, supporting his weight, half carrying him back towards the house, towards the destruction they'd wrought. This wasn't about the land anymore. It wasn't even just about money or greed. They had crossed a sacred line. They had laid hands on a good kid, someone under my protection in my home. They had turned this into something far more personal, far more dangerous. I called Brody again. No weariness in his voice this time, just clipped, professional urgency. Within 30 minutes, the ranch was swarming. Deputies, an ambulance for Ethan, state trooper investigators. Pictures were taken, evidence bagged, statements recorded. They took Ethan to the hospital in town. Concussion confirmed, wrist fractured, but he'd be okay. Thank God. As the ambulance lights disappeared down the driveway, I stood on my violated porch, watching the sun bleed into the western horizon, painting the sky in bruised reds and angry purples. Enough. No more reacting. No more defending. I swore then and there, under that blood-red sky, that I wouldn't just fight back. I would hunt down every last person responsible for this. From the thugs who'd hurt Ethan to the woman pulling the strings. I would gather the evidence, build the case, and I would make damn sure they answered for it. Not just in court. They had backed an old soldier into a corner, threatened his home, hurt his own. They had no idea what was coming for them now. I was just getting started. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford that night. After settling Ethan's worried parents, who'd come to sit with him at the hospital, I returned to the ranch. I sat on the porch, the cleaned M1 down one resting heavy but reassuring across my lap, watching the long dirt road that snaked towards the highway. Every distant headlight was a potential threat. Every rustle in the brush a possible intruder. But the real attack I knew wouldn't be subtle this time. Vance was cornered, hurting Ethan, ransacking my home. Those were acts of desperation. Her next move would be decisive, probably brazen, an all-or-nothing gamble. I had Michael Sterling working on the injunction, gathering affidavits, but the law grinds slow. Vance, I suspected, was about to try and outrun it. As the first pale gray fingers of dawn stretched across the eastern sky, painting the clouds in bruised shades of purple and pink, I saw it. Not just one vehicle, but a procession, a line of headlights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom, moving slowly, deliberately down the county road towards my gate. SUVs, big pickup trucks, even a couple of rental moving vans. At least 20 vehicles in all, maybe more. Leading the pack, inevitably, was Ellen Vance's new black SUV. Insurance must have paid out quickly on the BMW Zeus had remodeled. Behind her, the vehicles disgorged their occupants. Men in dark suits clutching briefcases, uniformed security guards adjusting tactical vests, clipboard-wielding agents fanning out, even a crew of rough-looking movers rolling dollies off the back of the rental trucks. This wasn't a sneak attack. It was a full-blown invasion staged for maximum intimidation. I stood up slowly from the porch swing, my knees cracking in protest, but my mind felt sharp, strangely calm. The adrenaline was there, humming just beneath the surface, but it was controlled, focused. I'd spent the hours before dawn making final checks. Every camera I'd installed was recording, feeding wirelessly to a secure cloud server Michael had set up. Copies of my deed, Brody's incident reports, photos of the damage, Ethan's preliminary statement, all uploaded. Safe from physical seizure. I left the pistol inside this time, holstered but accessible, just inside the door. Outnumbered 20 or 30 to 1. A gun wouldn't solve this directly. No, my preparation, the truth, and maybe a little help from my friends. That was my arsenal today. I walked steadily out to the main gate, stopping just inside the fence line as the convoy ground to a halt a few yards away. Vance emerged first, dressed this time in a crisp white pantsuit that practically glowed in the dim morning light, a stark, almost angelic contrast to the darkness of her intentions. She marched towards me, high heels somehow managing not to sink too deep into the packed dirt, a fat manila envelope clutched in her hand like a scepter. "This is your final notice, Morgan," she snapped, her voice tight with forced authority, holding the envelope out like a weapon. "We have a court-filed eviction order. You are illegally occupying corporate-owned property. If you do not vacate the premises peacefully and immediately, we have authorized security personnel," she gestured vaguely towards the men in tactical gear, "to remove you by force." I didn't take the envelope, didn't even look at it. I just held her gaze, letting the silence stretch. "You done?" I asked quietly. She sneered, though a flicker of uncertainty briefly crossed her eyes at my lack of reaction. "You have no idea who you're messing with, old man. This is bigger than you, bigger than this run-down dirt patch." Behind her, the suits began speaking into radios, spreading out along the fence line. The security guards shifted their stances, hands hovering near belts that likely held more than just handcuffs. The movers started pushing empty dollies towards my gate, a clear, visual threat. It was a well-oiled machine designed to intimidate, overwhelm, and crush resistance through sheer numbers and a facade of legality. I allowed myself a small, cold smile. "Funny thing about machines, Miss Vance," I said, my voice carrying easily in the still air. "They break down real easy when you know where to hit them, and you seem awfully desperate for someone holding all the cards." I saw the barb hit home in the sudden tightening around her mouth. "Is this whole thing," I continued, nodding towards her assembled army, "really worth prison time, Eleanor?" Her face flushed. "How dare you? We are acting entirely within the law." She turned to the head security guy, a burly man with a shaved head. "All right, open the gate. Use the bolt cutters if you have to clear the property." The security team started forward, one producing a large pair of bolt cutters. The movers behind them tensed, ready to flood onto the property. This was it, the moment of breach. And then came the sound, not from Vance's crew, but from behind them, from both ends of the county road. The low, guttural roar of multiple heavy-duty engines growing rapidly louder. Heads turned. Vance spun around, confusion momentarily replacing the fury on her face. "What the hell is that?" she shrieked, rolling into view, kicking up their own clouds of righteous dust. Came the cavalry. Big pickups, aging flatbeds, even a couple of retired sheriff's patrol trucks, still painted black and white, driven by my neighbors. Old Man Hemlock from 3 miles down. The Rodriguez family, whose fence I'd helped mend last spring. Jenkins and his boys who ran the feed store in town. Half a dozen veterans I knew from the local VFW post. Dozens of them. They pulled up strategically, forming a solid, immovable wall of steel and determination, boxing Vance's entire convoy in against my fence line. Doors opened, and people stepped out. Ranchers in worn denim and dusty boots, veterans standing tall in camo hats, young families looking grimly determined. And there, leaning on a crutch near Jed Jenkins' truck, grinning from ear to ear, despite the bruises still livid on his face, was Ethan. One by one, they stood firm, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Vance and her crew. A silent, unyielding message radiating from them. "You want Art Morgan's ranch? You'll have to go through all of us." Vance's face turned a shade of purple I hadn't thought humanly possible. "This is illegal," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You're obstructing justice. I'll have every single one of you arrested. Everyone." I chuckled then, a deep, genuine belly laugh that seemed to rattle the very air. "Funny you should mention arrests, Eleanor," I said, just as the unmistakable sound of sirens cut through the tension again. This time, it wasn't just 1 or 2 cruisers. 3 county sheriff vehicles pulled up smartly, lights flashing, followed closely by a state fire marshal's unit and 2 unmarked sedans I recognized as belonging to state investigators. Sheriff Brody stepped out, flanked by the fire marshal himself and 2 stern-looking investigators in suits far more convincing than Vance's hired muscle. Brody didn't look weary now. He looked resolute, his eyes hard as he surveyed the scene and then fixed on Vance. He strode right up to her, ignoring her sputtering protests. "Eleanor Vance," he said, his voice calm but carrying undeniable authority as he flipped open a small leather folder. "You are under arrest." Her jaw dropped. "On what grounds?" "This is harassment. I have an eviction order." "You have a fraudulent document," Brody corrected sharply. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false instruments, multiple counts of aggravated trespassing, coercion." He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "Assault," he nodded towards Ethan, "and arson." "Arson," Vance shrieked, genuine shock momentarily overriding her fury. "That's ridiculous. I had nothing to do with any fire." "Didn't you?" Brody replied coolly. He glanced towards Ethan. The young man took a steadying breath, supported by Jed Jenkins. "Sheriff," Ethan said, his voice clear despite the lingering rasp from his injuries. "When those guys jumped me, the ones who tied me up, I heard them talking just before they knocked me out good." One said to the other, "Make sure the old barn goes up good this time." Vance was pissed it didn't catch right before, once it, looking like an accident. A collective gasp went through the assembled neighbors. The fire marshal stepped forward slightly. "That statement corroborates evidence of accelerant found at the scene, Ms. Vance. Attempted arson is a serious felony." Brody didn't wait for her response. He nodded to his deputies. "Cuff her and her associates." He indicated the lead suits and the security chief. "The rest of you," he addressed the movers and lower-level employees, "stay put. You'll be questioned as material witnesses." Chaos erupted, but this time it was the controlled chaos of law enforcement. Deputies moved in efficiently. Vance struggled briefly, screeching threats and curses, her white suit getting smudged as handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. "This isn't over, Morgan. You hear me? It's not over," she screamed as they guided her, stumbling now, without the facade of power, towards a cruiser. The key figures on her team were apprehended and searched, one after another. The remaining workers and representatives appeared shocked and disoriented, their brief reign of authority vanishing like smoke. The gathering of local residents observed in somber quietude until a low hum of approval rippled through them. I stood by my property boundary, arms crossed, witnessing the culmination of weeks filled with apprehension, resentment, and sleepless nights. The sun had fully ascended, casting a golden radiance across the estate. I drew a deep breath, the atmosphere suddenly feeling purer, lighter. The immediate conflict, the struggle for this parcel of land, imbued with the toil of Morgan and the memory of Sarah, had finally concluded. We had emerged victorious. As the final patrol vehicles, carrying a scowling Elena Vance and her principal confederates, receded down the drive, a profound stillness descended upon the ranch, disturbed only by the relieved murmurs of my neighbors. The remaining security personnel and laborers, looking bewildered and without direction, were eventually processed and permitted to depart in their own conveyances, with the exception of the disgraced rental vehicles and Vance's new sport utility vehicle, which, along with the bull-scarred BMW, awaited towing services. My friends and neighbors approached me individually, offering supportive gestures and quiet words of encouragement. Jed Jenkins, the Rodriguez family, my fellow servicemen, their faces mirrored a shared triumph. Even Ethan, leaning on his crutch, managed to stand tall and offer a weary, bruised smile. Then, gradually, they returned to their respective lives, leaving me standing at the entrance, the morning sun warming my countenance, the immediate danger finally extinguished. Yet the silence was not hollow. It was heavy with the gravity of recent events and the dawning realization that the legal repercussions were likely just commencing in a transformed capacity. The ensuing weeks were a blur of legal proceedings, fortunately managed predominantly by Michael Sterling. Investigators, equipped with legal orders and motivated by the evidence secured from Vance's arrest and the testimonies provided by myself, Ethan, and others, began to meticulously unravel an intricate web of deception. It transpired that Vance was more than a self-serving real estate agent. She was a central figure in a predatory consortium of developers and financiers intent on acquiring extensive territories through intimidation, fraudulent practices, and coercion across 3 distinct counties. My personal struggle, it appeared, had exposed a far broader criminal enterprise. Other landowners and farmers, upon learning of Vance's apprehension and encouraged by our resolute stand, started coming forward with their own accounts of harassment and falsified paperwork. The state attorney general's office became involved. It was a laborious progression, but justice, it seemed, was finally preparing to act. Vance and her chief collaborators were confronted with a series of serious criminal accusations. Their costly legal representatives found themselves on increasingly precarious ground. My own legal entanglement resolved with much greater swiftness. With Vance facing criminal fraud charges directly linked to the documents she had filed against my property, the civil lawsuits she had initiated crumbled like a poorly constructed edifice. Michael presented my original deed, dating back a century, alongside the evidence of forgery and the ongoing criminal investigation to the judge. The process was blessedly brief. The judge dismissed all claims against me with prejudice, formally invalidated the fraudulent purchase agreement Vance had submitted, and issued a clear, unambiguous decree confirming my sole and undisputed ownership of the Morgan Ranch. Holding that final court order in my possession felt akin to shedding a substantial, unseen burden that I had unconsciously carried. The land once again felt truly mine, secured not only by its history, but by the formal validation of the law, which we had so tenaciously fought to uphold. Gradually, life on the ranch began to re-establish its natural cadence. Ethan's wrist mended and his bruises faded. Although the experience had undoubtedly instilled a sense of sobriety in him, his youthful resilience remained evident. He was back assisting with the daily tasks, perhaps more subdued, but with a newfound maturity in his gaze. "I'm glad we showed him, Mr. Morgan," he remarked one afternoon, leaning against the newly repaired fencing and observing the cattle grazing contentedly. The connection between us, forged in shared hardship, felt stronger, as did the bonds within the community. Neighbors began visiting more frequently, not solely for casual conversation, but to offer assistance, share updates, or simply to check in. The ordeal had inadvertently strengthened the very community Vance had attempted to dismantle. One morning, while inspecting the damage near the porch, I noticed it. Tiny, vibrant green shoots emerging from the base of Sarah's rosebush, the one Vance had deliberately overturned in a fit of petty spite. Life, tenacious and unyielding, was making a comeback. The deep wounds persisted, but genuine peace, the kind earned through adversity, finally seemed within reach. That autumn, we undertook the reconstruction of the barn. It was not solely Ethan and me. A call went out, and the community responded. Trucks arrived laden with lumber generously donated from Jenkins' establishment. Neighbors appeared, armed with tools and strong arms. The air filled not with tension, but with the percussive rhythm of hammering, shared laughter, and the mingled sense of sawdust and barbecue smoke wafting from the makeshift lunch areas prepared by the women of the church. It was more than just a barn raising, it was a celebration, a defiant proclamation embedded in every beam and rafter. While clearing the final remnants of charred debris from the old foundation, my hand closed around a small, metallic object, a severely scorched silver locket, a gift I had given Sarah years prior. Though empty and fire-damaged, it remained intact. A poignant memento unearthed amidst the devastation, a promise of enduring continuity. Now I sit on my porch once more. Coffee steams in the crisp morning air. The familiar swing moves gently beneath me. The panorama is unchanged. The vast expanse of the Texas sky, the rolling pastures where my livestock graze peacefully, the horses ambling by the creek. However, there is a subtle difference. The tranquility feels more profound now, hard-won, and paid for not just in effort and anxiety, but in the unwavering loyalty of community and the tenacious refusal to be defeated. The new barn stands as a proud silhouette against the horizon, a testament to our resilience. My ranch is secure. My reputation is unblemished. The Morgan heritage entrusted to me remains safeguarded. The ordeal imparted lessons I believed I already understood regarding the intrinsic value of home, the strength derived from fellowship, and the quiet perseverance required to confront avarice. Vance and her associates face prolonged incarceration, their network dismantled. Yet, I am aware that vigilance is the cost of maintaining peace. Should anyone ever attempt to lay claim to this land again, they will discover the same truth that Elena Vance did. This territory is not merely mine, I belong to it. And rooted here, anchored in history and community, we are virtually indomitable.